The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Bryan and Mr. Betcher for Bringing Down Security.
Hello.
Hello. Miss Berlin is, she said she'll be joining us, but, you know, she works for a company that deals with urgent customer needs, so customers first. Family zero with customers first, and then the podcast is second. That's how we do it
All
here.
those needs come on Fridays, though.
Yeah, well, a lot of things happen on Friday. I'm still crossing my fingers that we don't end up with another breach, as per the usual on a Friday. So,
hey, this is a family show. You're not supposed to use that kind of language.
I know breach is a 4-letter word, isn't it? So Brakesec, it's the early edition. We're up a little early this morning because last week and the week before potentially we had a CEO on the call, and of course, Katie's time is uber valuable, and we didn't want to waste it with Sunday evening discussions, and same here. We have another great leader in our industry. We've had him on the show before, and it's Phil Beyer. Welcome, Phil.
Hello. Great to talk to you guys again.
Fantastic.
Hey, now,
go ahead.
You said leader, and he was on the show. Are those two like one after the other, or can we he's a leader because he was on the show? And,
You're
or
trying
we had
to,
him on the show. How does that work?
It's 7 a.m. my time. You're making me hurt my brain. He was always a leader. Even when I knew him in Austin, and you knew him in Austin, he was a leader in his organization. I found out he moved to New York. I thought he was still in Austin, but Phil, tell us how where your superhuman superhero story and how you got to be where you're at right now.
Right. So I only say right because I've caught up on my Brakesec listening to make sure I was ready to talk to you guys, and that is the common beginning, isn't it? Which is good. It's a good one. Point of clarification or correction briefly. We have not yet moved to the New York City area. We will, and I'll explain that perhaps later when we get a chance to talk about Etsy specifically. But as of right now, not that it really matters since we're all still in pandemic time, but we're still in the Round Rock and Austin general area.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I wish that meant I could actually go, have a coffee or lunch with Bryan Betcher, but I suppose we're all respecting the social distancing or physical distancing.
That's right. Yep.
I suppose in terms of origin story or something to that effect, I would just say that having been a consultant before and moving into kind of security from just general technology, the interest there was purely in kind of technical fascination area. So I started playing with technology when I was young, probably like each of you and many listeners. Got to know computers because it was fun to play games, and I wanted to play the newest games, and so I wanted to be better and better at understanding how to tweak my computer to play games without being able to afford the latest kit or the latest gear. I studied physics in college and also studied a little bit of computer science. I kind of wish now that I studied more computer science, but all of that learning had to do with learning how to learn, and so when it comes to technology, where the pace of change is so rapid, it was really appealing to take an opportunity to dive into something that was exciting. Now, I should also say that I wasn't accepted to my preferred graduate school, so I had to find another alternative, and working with the consulting company was one of those things that popped onto the opportunity scene early. And kind of the rest is history in the sense that the stuff that was most fascinating was securing things. So either helping other companies figure out how to make their stuff more secure, or fiddling with what might commonly be called security technology, to some extent, kind of infrastructure stuff, VPNs and firewalls and stuff like that. The only other thing I'll perhaps say, before more questions or other directions we want to go, is that from a origin story for leadership, that was a little different too. I gained experience as a technical contributor in security and consultant and team leader, but I didn't really know how much I was going to enjoy leading people until I jumped into it. So I might encourage folks that are I don't know, have a little trepidation or a little anxiety about managing people or teams or taking on a leadership role. Don't knock it before you try it, so to speak. Give it a shot. It may be something that really resonates with you. I've run into a number of people over the years who have said something to that effect, that they didn't realize how fulfilling it would be until they dipped their toe in the water. And that's to some extent how it was for me. I made that transition from consultant to program owner because I was, I don't know, I suppose a little tired of making recommendations and not getting a chance to see them through to the end. So
right.
Generally a consultant or a tester or an auditor comes in and says, here's the best way to do it. Here's what you should be doing. And then usually walks away. Sometimes you get brought back and to do a review or a refresher and see how things have gone. But for the most part, the implementation and bringing things through the finish line, which turns out is a really fulfilling part of the role for me. That I wanted. That's what drove me into becoming more of a leader of a program or an owner of a program as opposed to just a consultant advising. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, too many times I think consultants expect their hard work to go be done and implemented, and then they come back the next year and it's like, yeah, we haven't done anything. And right. It's like, well, what did I spend all my time telling you that there was a problem if you actually aren't doing anything about it? Do you not even care that I'm here? No, we're just checking a box, which is the unsaid word. It's like, yeah, we're just checking a box. You got us a pen test. Great. We paid $20,000 to check a box. We'll get to it when we get to it. So I can definitely understand the implementation part or the execution part being something that would appeal to maybe somebody who's been doing consulting for a long time. So, Mr. Boettcher, you had a topic of interest. I have a topic of interest that I want to hit with Phil as well, but I'd like you to go ahead and set it up.
Yeah, Phil. In order to best achieve the goals that you have in mind, a lot of that is hard work and a lot of that is learning. And I know you are an avid reader and podcast listener. In fact, whenever I see you off in the distance, you've got headphones in your ears, you're listening to something, right? Audible or whatever. And I often come to you for book recommendations, right? And some of the recommendations you've given me are behavioral psychology and science. And I just want you to touch on how that reading books like what Bryan has also read, Thinking Fast and Slow, books like that help you along the way, and the impact that they have on, how you progress in your career or take advantage of what you've learned from those books and podcasts, and also how it helped you get where you are today.
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked. I always love talking about learning with folks, whether that's via podcasts or books or other stuff, mostly because it gives me an opportunity to get a recommendation out of somebody, right? So I won't let either of you off the hook. I'll go first, of course, with recommendations, but make sure you both leave me with something to explore as well. I think I'll say that it's hard to measure what effect a particular book or tactic or thing has had on my career. That's a little too granular for, not that you were expecting that necessarily, but it's hard to go back and say, oh, it's this thing, right, that made the biggest difference. But in particular, one book in particular or something. I think, however, it's not hard to say, it's rather trivial to say that learning itself or continuous improvement from a professional standpoint has absolutely made the biggest difference on my career over in particular, the last 10 years of team leadership and professional growth. Because, we're all surrounded by folks in our profession who have made themselves successful and have distinguished themselves by increasing their skills. So generally, I mean, I suppose that's an assumption, but I think it's a fair assumption. And so what those skills might be, what they've chosen to develop and grow from a security skill standpoint, like a technical skill standpoint, we have lots of examples. And so maybe somebody's great at network security, maybe somebody's an incredible software engineer, perhaps some folks have melded the two and have distinguished themselves as DevSecOps engineers or something like that, right? And so those areas of possible skill development are I would argue more obvious to most of us than what I would challenge are perhaps non-traditional and therefore possibly more valuable areas of skill development, because it gives one the opportunity to be set apart or to be unique in the skills that you bring to a group. So if you're the third person on the team of 5 to be a firewall expert, or you're the second person in a team of 3 who is a Python guru, there's nothing that's distinguishing there. Perhaps that may be an overstatement. But if you are an excellent communicator, if you are a very effective understander of people, if your emotional intelligence and or empathy is through the roof, and you can understand the folks that you're working with on your team, your manager and your leader, your direct reports, your peers, your stakeholders, your external customers and leaders, and or your customer base in some particular way, that distinguishing characteristic has much, I think this is another assumption, but I think it's fair to say, has broader reaching implications than honing the technical skill that we all know is also critical to accomplishing a role or accomplishing a mission or finishing a project. So that's kind of my precursor or like overarching thing to say. To talk more specifically, what has fascinated me over the last many years as a leader is in understanding people. One of those things that is not obvious at the outset, but is seemingly obvious after you learn it, is that people are irrational. So a Duke professor named Dan Ariely wrote a book many years ago that has a fantastic title called Predictably Irrational. And the title comes from the irrational behavior of humans when compared to a quote unquote rational macroeconomic or economic theory of how people should act. So at a macro level, economics does relatively accurately describe what will happen, to some extent for big economies and countries and things. But at a micro level or at a personal level, it is woefully inaccurate. That is, economics as a discipline is woefully inaccurate in terms of predicting what a given human is going to do when posed with a decision. And so the irrationality of human behavior is something for us to understand. I would argue in particular for security folks. I think technology folks in general spend less time on it than we should. And security folks absolutely can benefit from learning more about how humans act. We talk about it all the time in security awareness training. We talk about it all the time when we're trying to nudge people to make the right decision, to not click on the link, or to be aware of the risk that's introduced by something before the breach and not just after. Okay, sorry to use the 4-letter word, but it is a useful thing to talk about. That yes, we all are affected by availability, whether it's because we're in Tornado Alley and the tornado just happened, and so now we're more prone to plan for the future tornado that's going to happen, whereas we weren't the year before because it hit some other town, right? And that's a provable heuristic called the availability heuristic, which is a cognitive bias, one of many. Same thing with availability. We talk about it all the time. Don't let an incident go to waste, right? That is an example in the security world of the availability heuristic coming into play. A year ago, the year before the event, no one could be convinced that we needed to plan for it. And the month after, or the week after, or the day after, we get all the money we want, so to speak. So understanding these things and why they happen, and why people make the decisions that they make, it's not to manipulate. So I want to be clear that my intention, nor do I recommend anyone else's intention, is malicious or nefarious in nature or manipulative or Machiavellian or anything like that, right? That's not the reason. The reason is to understand so that for the betterment of society, not to understand for the manipulation and or the sole benefit of you and your team. So there is a temptation when you read a book like Influence by Robert Cialdini to read it like, ooh, here's how I can manipulate my audience, or here's how I can manipulate folks. And I think that is a road that's fraught with danger. It's not just immoral or unethical, it's also a very dangerous road to hoe. If instead your approach is to understand why we all make the decisions we make, including myself, right? My wife and I were joking about this earlier this week, that we both know that this cognitive bias is happening. I can't remember the exact situation or what we were talking about, but we knew we were both being affected by this thing, and yet we were still ready to make the decision that we were intending to make. So I've made a couple of book recommendations of historic stuff, but just to be clear, the stuff that's captured my attention this month, or September, I should say, I started reading 2 books in September that I'll recommend to each of you and to the audience. I started reading Your Brain at Work by Dr. David Rock. That's R-O-C-K. And that book is about how our brains are affected by stimuli, how our brains are either positively or negatively affected by decisions we make. And then also he offers this, by the way, this book is extremely practical, even though it may not sound that way. It may sound like a scientific text. That's not the case. It is absolutely eminently practical. Every page gives you some little tidbit or technique as to how to restructure your day or restructure what you do, so that you can be more effective and be less distractible and less pulled away from solving a problem that requires creativity and or some other kind of challenge that we as knowledge workers are faced with on a daily basis. So that's book number 1 that I'll recommend. The second book was a recommendation from peers, from a CISO friend and a group of friends were reading the book together. Actually, they've pretty much already read the book and I'm catching up. It's Atomic Habits by James Clear, which you may have heard as a recommendation before. It's been out for a few years, and it was on my list before. I bumped it up though based on these folks' recommendations, and I'm glad I did. I thought I kind of knew most of what I needed to know about habits after reading Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, and knowing something about B.J. Fogg's Tiny Habits book. Well, if you like either one of those, James Clear takes some of the learnings about habit that Duhigg collated and pulled together. And he also takes some of the practical tips that Fogg offers in Tiny Habits, in his Tiny Habits recipe, and he transforms them into what I think in the book Atomic Habits. This is another example of a book that I am just amazed how dense it is in terms of the value per page or the value per paragraph. So not only is every chapter, you could literally read the book by just flipping to the end of each chapter and reading the chapter summary, but it seems like he did an excellent job of editing and pulling everything into some very concise and powerful chapters about developing systems. The quotable quote from this book that is still gives me goosebumps and it still causes me to think about what my objectives are is that if you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So the concept is that if you build in habitual systems in your day and in your life, then that's what is that will form the foundation of your gradual progress towards the life that you want, as opposed to setting lofty goals that you may or may not hit and you strive for. So his contrasting of those two perspectives or approaches in the very early chapters captured me, and I'm so glad, because every single chapter just builds on another where he lays out 4 laws of kind of habitual or behavioral systems that you can use to craft better habits in your life. And whether they're small or big, it's a super powerful book, and I really can't recommend it more highly at this point. And I'm only halfway through. The kind of wrap up there in terms of answering your question, Brian, which we may have already forgotten, but since I've gone on and on, but that's what I'll say is kind of the biggest change for me over the past many years, is continuing to hone my own self professionally, both in technical skill, but though less in the past few years, more so in professional skill as a leader. And if that is not part of your professional system, your professional approach, your professional growth and development, then that I would say is the biggest thing that you can change to change your trajectory, especially if you've been on a plateau or perhaps even kind of trending downwards in your own perspective of what your accomplishments have been like. So I hope that was helpful and useful, and I didn't go out too far afield from your original intent.
No, very much so. Now, from a practical standpoint, like what you've done lately, how has that affected? How has all that learning affected you lately in your getting you where you are?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll try to get a little bit more practical and specific than I was, even though I hopefully made some concrete points about professional development and growth.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk more specifically about, say, the last 12 months, give or take.
Yeah, let's get personal.
Yeah, sure. So 12 months ago, give or take, I think it was, I can't remember if it was end of August or end of September, but so either 12 or 13 months ago, I took a step back professionally and realized, so let me set the context. At the time, so now, yes, you said at the outset, but just to be clear, I'm the head of security at Etsy today, and today is 9 weeks and like 4 days in seat in that position. So, and this is we're recording on October 2nd. This time last year, though, I was the vice president of security engineering for global payments, or actually just before that position, because I was in a company that was merging with another company. So TSYS, Total System Services, a financial services provider, and then Global Payments, a different financial services provider, made the decision in the middle of last year in 2019 to merge. And they were at the time about the same size companies. One was about 13 or so thousand employees, and the other was about 12 or so thousand employees, similar revenue, similar, not identical, but similar customer bases and targets and things. So there was a lot of things that made sense at the time for these two companies to merge. And so the unified company Global Payments came together, and merger closed in September of last year. So I guess literally a year ago, I was vice president of security engineering for Global Payments. And in the middle of that process, I took a step back and realized, you know what, there is a slim possibility that things do not go my way in this merger. I was, in hindsight, of course, things went just fine for me in that merger and for my team and everything else and for security. But I didn't know that at the time. And nobody knows that at the time, right? And so I realized that, wow, my LinkedIn profile is woefully inaccurate and behind. My resume is out of date, and all the other things that you might look at if suddenly you get the pink slip or the ushered out the door or something. So again, I wasn't necessarily afraid that would happen, or didn't think that was likely, but it was a slim possibility. And so that's what we do in security, right? We plan for eventualities, and we do disaster recovery and business continuity. So we should do the same things for our career. And in that sense, I was not following my own advice. If you heard that there, my own advice to my team and to other professionals is to make a quarterly habit of updating resume, of updating your LinkedIn and things like that, because it shouldn't be a one-time thing. It shouldn't be after the 5 years in the company that you love, and unfortunately things not go well, and now it's time to move on or something. And that's probably best case scenario. Worst case scenario, it's been 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, and you haven't made any updates. So that I was not following that own practice, and so I had a couple of years to catch up on, and I took a week off. I took a professional development week where I literally went to, instead of going to work to the office, I went to Panera Bread to just a cafe, and sat down on Wi-Fi and hacked my resume and hacked my professional profile to make sure that it was much more accurate. I followed a lot of advice I've been following a long time from an organization called Manager Tools that I still have highly recommended and still highly recommend to anyone, manager-tools.com. There is a wealth of practical guidance on how to format your resume, on how to track your professional growth, and how to keep that all maintained and well honed. And so, again, I had a little bit of catching up to do, but not too long, which is what I'm thankful for. And I spent time doing that. And so my resume after that week was able to be whittled down to one page, where appropriate and necessary. And all of my updates were measurable with some sort of accomplish this via this method with this result kind of accomplishment bullet. And there was no fluff at all in the resume, this and that. So all that to say that I was ready for whatever happened. That was one very, very practical and important thing that I would recommend to any professional at any point in their career. If it's been a while, do exactly the same thing, whether you do it like me or some other way. Go to Manager Tools, buy their $30 resume workbook, which is like 80 freaking pages of every little minute detail and how to edit your resume, and take a few days off. Maybe it only takes you a couple days. If you're like me and you're slow, then it'll take you a whole week. But that is a very practical and tactical tip that you can do. I did a few other things. I was starting to develop, so this is post-merger towards the end of last year now. Things were settling in. I was starting to be a bit more habitual about working from home, which is, I don't know, perhaps a little bit prescient, but I won't take any credit for that. I realized, you know what, if I want to be more efficient at working from home, I need a good camera, I need a good setup, I need to make sure that I'm working all well and good. And the reason I bring that up is because now these days, making an impression on people via video is a really important aspect of relational things. And so it's a very tactical and very practical tip to say, whatever you can do to improve even a little bit, to improve your visibility, your how you come off to people on video is an excellent thing to spend some time on. Again, I won't take any credit for being able to predict or know the ultimate value of that today, because of course, being on video all day, every day is it's very uncomfortable for some people, and for me, it's a very comfortable thing at this point. But that's another tip that I kind of took to heart at the end of the year, and made a few investments before the proverbial bad stuff hit the fan. And so I was able to buy some stuff before it got really expensive or backlogged. Yep. A couple other things, and then I'll pause for questions or clarifications. But I have some other stuff that I did, and this is more about getting around to knowing that it was going to be video interviewing time. So fast forward or back up maybe just about 6 months ago, I had an inkling that it was time to move on. Not because, again, anything bad was going on, because Global Payments is still positioned pretty well, and I'm excited for the future of that company. But for me professionally, there were some things that I wanted out of my career and had not yet achieved, namely being the head of security, or for running a security program, or being responsible for an entire security program. And so as I started to look around, realized as pandemic was hitting and other kinds of stuff that, all right, I'm not going to be, so I'm more effective personally in person. I love shaking hands. I love being able to make solid eye contact with folks in the room. And I realized that I was less effective over video than I wanted to be, especially in an interviewing situation. So I made a few other things, a few other improvements in terms of just how I showed up in video, in terms of how I organize my little space that I have. But so I'm looking at it right now. I've also got a little reminder that I caught from other little bits of practical advice. I've got an eminently practical thing, an index card of reminders, so that when I'm looking directly into my camera, which I have practiced and have tried to habitually train myself to look in the camera and not look at the video that I see of Bryan and Bryan here in front of me. But I want to make sure I'm making eye contact, which at a subconscious level is positively affecting the relationship that I'm having with each of you as we talk. Right next to that camera, I've got an index card that says smile in big bold letters. It says use big gestures. It says raise eyebrows, speak slowly, which I'm not really doing very well. Think open and be energetic and be excited, because all of those things come through in video. They come through even in audio. Most of my interviewing was not done purely via video. A lot of it was done either phone or audio without a video interaction, and it still comes through when you're smiling on the phone. You can hopefully each of you has experienced this, but you can hear that in the person on the other end of the line. And so thinking about those things intentionally, being intentional about improving how you show up to either a meeting that you're having with your team, or a one-on-one with your manager, or an interview, or a podcast like this. All of that intentional choice that you make to show up in a way that is the best self, the best of who you can be, that's something you have control over. That's something we all have control over. And I would encourage each of us to continue to improve and grow in that respect as well.
Can't hear you, Break.
That's the new 2020 thing. You're on mute, Bryan. You unmute yourself. Yeah. I know you've got about 10 minutes left, Mr. Betcher. I wanted to find out what your book recommendations were, and if you had any other questions. I have some CISO and leadership related questions, and then I can give my book recommendations, and then we'll talk about another topic.
Oh boy. Kind of put on the spot here. I've been reading more economic books and stock market books. I recommend anything by Thomas Sowell as far as economics goes. Currently, I bought this book, and I'm showing it to you just because Phil mentioned part of this. It's called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. It was written a long time ago, and it gives examples of where people just went crazy. Following ideas that just weren't practical, but yet most people were under the delusions that all kinds of other people were, and they got hammered as a result. For example, going after, well, one practical example is not in the book. People, at least where I am, were buying these emus and emu eggs, right? And then they were $500 per egg or whatever it was, $1,000 per egg, because we didn't have emus here, and they had just arrived from, I guess, wherever they're from, Australia or whatnot. And so you'd ask them, why do you want an emu egg? But, well, you could sell them. Oh, okay. Well, can you eat the eggs? No, you would never eat them because they're too expensive. Okay, so what do? Well, you incubate them and you grow these emus. Okay, well, do you eat the emus? No. You would use the emus to get more eggs, and then you could sell those eggs. So all it was this big bubble, and you got to be careful because those things will poke your face off, right? And so they're dangerous animals, I would assume. And then of course the bubble popped and they became practically worthless at some point.
Wow. Okay. Any other books that you've been working on?
Well, I am reading also another book called, I think it's The Big Nine, which talks about the 9 companies that basically are going to, quote, take over the world, the Googles and the Facebooks, and how they are growing, and the technologies that they're developing and the companies that they're buying to basically become part of the, the new world order. And how do you at least take advantage of that, prepare for it, right? And prepare your life for what is to come. so that you're not left in a delusion and a madness of crowd situation, right? The more you know about how the world is working and the future, what's going to happen, the better off you're prepared for what's to come.
It's Big Nine, Thinking Machines and Humanity. I'm putting all of the book recommendation links in our show notes, so if you are interested.
How the tech titans and their thinking machines
Yep.
could warp humanity.
Yep, got it. All right. Amy Webb wrote that. Yeah, so cool. All right. I would assume that do you have any more, or we can move along. Okay, cool.
Today.
Yeah, I actually find the delusion one kind of interesting because I remember stories that have been told or heard in about Australia. It's like, when the settlers first got to Australia, there were snakes. So, the British folk, of course, brought over rabbits to get rid of the snakes. But then the rabbit population exploded. So they introduced foxes to get rid of the rabbits, to get rid of the snakes. And, now there's a lot of indigenous populations that are being killed by invasive species. And, it's just interesting how that kind of, it's along the same lines. It's not, ostrich eggs and stuff, but it's interesting the thinking process behind, people trying to logically solve, there's land, so there must be animals on it. We'll just introduce something that's completely invasive to the environment. So that's very interesting. So Phil, you were talking about career tools, manager tools podcast. Career tools is also another good one. If you're looking to work on that, there's various instructions there. I think they just posted back in August the 2020 resume review, which I think they do on a yearly basis.
They do. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And they, I don't think that they've actually changed that guidance in 10 years. They said it's the same.
That's right.
Much, nothing has changed in 10 years. It's still how the best way to do it. So I tend to try to catch career tools and manager tools when I'm out on my runs or walks. The very good podcast there. Another one I like to listen to is 99% Invisible, because it really gives you kind of a back end kind of feel, or like the backstory on various things. That's not manager related. It's just something I listen to for entertainment purposes. But when I was on site with a customer for about 4 months, one of the ones that I started listening to back and forth as an audiobook was Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers. And this goes along the lines of, the psychology and thinking fast and slow. I got a lot of similarities there. It's like people assume things, and they talked about Fidel Castro fooling the CIA. There were stories about how Neville Chamberlain, why did Neville Chamberlain think he could trust Adolf Hitler back in the 30s before World War II? There was a lot of different, Sandra Bland, the arrest of Sandra Bland on a roadside in Texas, which unfortunately led to her death. Gladwell talks about Bernie Madoff and the trial of Amanda Knox, and why did everybody assume that she was guilty? It's because of her seemingly emotional detachedness to the whole thing, where it felt like she didn't react like we expected people to react. And it talks about how we project our expectations on people, and when we fail to get those expectations, something's weird, something's off.
Yeah.
I actually found that was a very, very good book. Malcolm, of course, reads it himself. He's a very entertaining person. There's quite a bit in the way of it's like an enhanced ebook. So there's a lot of interviews and stuff that you're going to hear on the ebook that you're not going to get in the print book. So that would be one book I would suggest get the audiobook of, and the paper book if you want to refer back to that. But it's a fairly fast read. And then there's some audio samples on Amazon's site. That was our show for this week. You can find show notes for this and all of our shows at www.breakingsecurity.com. You can also find an RSS link on the site to add to your favorite podcatcher. You can find all of us on Twitter. Miss Berlin can be found at InfoSyster, INFOSYSTIR. Mr. Betcher can be found at BetcherPwned, BOETTCHERPWNED. And you can follow me on Twitter at Bryan Brake, BryanBrake. We have a Slack. Come join us on our Slack. A lot of great things going on there, a lot of channels of various InfoSec-related subjects. You can get an invite on Twitter by emailing our official Twitter handle for the show at Brakesec, Brakesec, or you can email us at bds.podcast@gmail.com. Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters for their monetary assistance by offsetting costs involved in putting out a weekly show. Zoom fees, Libsyn hosting, domain purchase, renewal, equipment upgrades, time and effort building the community we have. We appreciate all of your help and support. If you'd like a t-shirt, stickers, coffee mug, or just to show your support for the show, you can check out our TPub site, www.tpublic.com/user/BDS podcast. We thrive on your feedback. A quick 5-star comment on iTunes or Google Play Store or your favorite streaming service, Spotify, Pandora, what have you, go a long way to gaining us additional visibility. It takes no time at all, and we appreciate your help in spreading the word. That was it for Breaking Down Security this week. Be safe, be well, be kind to one another, take care of yourself because you're the only you have, and we'll talk to you again soon.